Volkswagen could be facing an up to $1.1 million fine for each breach of consumer law in Australia for the possible use of defective devices in its vehicles. In a statement, ACCC Chairman Rod Sims says the investigation is a priority, adding if defective devices are found to have been used locally, it would violate consumer and safety standards under consumer law. Corporate Watchdog has demanded VW hand over its marketing materials and will not hesitate to take action if Australian car buyers have been exposed to false or misleading representations. VW Australia has yet to clarify if it had supplied cars or components to the Australian market that used the defective device. Well, for more, we're joined by ACCC Chairman Rod Sims from our Melbourne studio. Mr. Sims, thanks very much for your time today. Just to start with, have you been in contact with VW Australia?
Our contacts so far have been with the Department of Industry. When we've met the companies, we've done that with them. So there has been quite a lot of contact, yes. Obviously,
this has been a global issue. Have you been, I imagine like the rest of, were you surprised by this sheer scale and I suppose deceptive nature of it?
If what we've been led to believe is true, then it really is quite stunning conduct by a major company. You really don't expect major companies to do this sort of thing. So surprised doesn't quite do it, I'm afraid.
That's right. I think everyone's been gobsmacked by it.
Absolutely.
Gobsmacked is a good word.
And Mr. Sims, do you therefore see any potential for criminal prosecution coming out of this?
That would be a matter for the police under a heading of fraud. We, the ACCC, are looking at two issues. One, the one you mentioned, whether there's a breach of the design rules, which in turn automatically is a breach of the mandatory safety standards. That would occur if these testing devices were active in the vehicles. Secondly, and separately, we're looking at whether consumers have been misled. That is to say, were they given brochures and other advertising material in the selling of the cars that was misleading? We'll be looking at that as well.
And could the potential, I suppose, penalties be if found guilty on those two counts?
Well, let me say two things about that. Firstly, there's just a whole lot we don't know. So it's at a very early stage, and that's what's really so frustrating about this, given how long it's gone on. So we'll be approaching Volkswagen directly to get information that we'll want to have fairly quickly. If that information leads us to institute proceedings because we believe there's a breach of our Act, that's what we'll do. The penalties are $1.1 million per breach. Exactly what those penalties could amount to is extremely difficult to tell because it depends on how many breaches the court finds. But at up to $1.1 million per breach, the penalties could be substantial.
And what sort of, I know it's very, very early days, but you did list this as a priority investigation. What sort of timeline would you hope to be working on when it comes to getting a response and being able to do whatever various tests and studies you need to be able to do to determine what's happened, if anything, here in Australia?
Oh, look, we'd be thinking to move fairly quickly on this. Obviously, to get evidence to put before a court, it takes time, and we've got to assess whether we've got that evidence, but we'll be making those decisions fairly quickly. This won't drag on too long. We've got compulsory information gathering powers that we can use if we need to. I think an issue of this magnitude needs to be addressed quickly. It shouldn't linger.
And you're confident that you have the, I suppose, market powers to be able to bring any sort of breaches to justice?
Oh, there's no question we've got the powers. The question is, has there been a breach? That's the issue. And with so many questions unanswered, and those questions can take you down all sorts of paths. I mean, it really is a very complicated matter. But there's no question we've got the information gathering powers, and then we've got the powers under our Act to take people to court if one of the two offences I mentioned occurred.
It's been suggested, and certainly it's only anything but a suggestion at this point, but do you worry that perhaps it's not just Volkswagen that might be guilty of these such practices?
Well, look, I have to say, given the nature of what we've both agreed was a gobsmacking if true, offence, I'm afraid I'd be stunned if other companies had done this. But you never know where these things lead. The thing is, once you turn over a rock, you never quite know what you find. But this is such unusual behaviour, I'd be stunned if anybody else engaged in it. But if they did, we'll find out.
And just finally, you've been in the corporate world for, I won't embarrass you to say how long, but a long
very
time.
long time, yes.
Have you seen anything like this before?
Look, if I'm being a bit blunt, I mean, when the descriptions of rigging LIBOR first surfaced, I have to say, gobsmacked by that as someone, as you say, who's been in the corporate world using LIBOR for around about 40 years. To think that that could be rigged was stunning, and this is of that proportion, I have to say. The world never ceases to amaze us.